Hey there, YouTube. I'm Yukitsu. This is the Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to another Tuesday talk show. And again, we're going to be talking a little bit about psychology, and this time a little bit about psychiatry, as well as Persona 5. I've gotten through the level against Mejed, and it is an extremely interesting one. In this one, you don't actually attack the people who are attacking you. In this particular one, we are actually breaking into the heart of Futaba Sakura, who is the adopted daughter of the person who's taking care of you. And again, loads and loads and loads of spoilers going to be discussed in this, so again, don't listen to this if you haven't played the game. And, you know, maybe if you don't intend to play the game, just go out and play it anyway. It's a fantastic one. But in any event, this is an incredibly interesting chapter in terms of people who are interested in psychology and therapy and stuff like that. Not necessarily from a Jungian or Freudian point of view, but just in the general view. And we're going to be talking a little bit about diagnosis and diagnostic errors in psychology and psychiatry as well as comorbidity, which is an important issue that leads to a lot of this sort of misclassification. Because there are plenty of people who will say that they've been misdiagnosed and mistreated by mental health professionals, and I mean that does happen. And it is actually a persistent problem in the field just because of how difficult it is to accurately do this sort of stuff. And we'll be going over why that is in just a second there when we talk about Futaba Sakura, who's the person who sort of joined up on our team there. So basically she's the sort of a hacker nerd who spends all of her time in her bedroom sort of thing there, locked up, and she has tremendous social anxiety and social stress, and she actually tricks or coerces or gets the group of phantom thieves to steal her own heart. And this is one of the few chapters where I think that they actually get the shadow in the way that Carl Jung would actually have advocated for its use. So for all of the other ones, the shadow is something that is completely and utterly unremorseful, completely and utterly unrepentant about its actions, and is entirely self-destructive and destructive to the people around it. So in other words, this would be maybe perhaps someone who has encountered the shadow and fully embraced it. That isn't actually what's happened in any of their cases, because Kamoshida, Madarame, Kaneshiro, all three of those people do display, well, actually, maybe not Kaneshiro, the other two display obvious outward affectations that are completely contradictory to what their shadow is. So they haven't actually completely become their shadow, but they seem to have come to some sort of formal acceptance of that as a full and integral part of their true selves. And yes, you are supposed to come to terms with your shadow and accept it as part of yourself, but it's not supposed to be the only part of yourself, and that seems to be what's happened in their cases. So this could be construed as a sort of therapeutic maladjustment in terms of dealing with the shadow in that sort of journey of self-discovery that Jung might advocate for. In Futaba's case, her shadow is actually trying to help her get across one of her problems by realizing something important about herself that she's locked away in there. And while her shadow isn't an entirely positive influence, it's not an entirely negative one either, since she has a low self-esteem, or she has some elements of a low self-esteem. That's going to be something else that we're going to be talking about. But rather than trying to cause her to be self-destructive or cause her to destroy other people, it's trying to force her to come to a realization of herself. And while the character never actually fully embraces the shadow in that classical sense, in the same sense as those other three characters prior to her, she does use the shadow and talk to it and discuss with it and actually move forward from her problems in a way that would be much more reminiscent of how Carl Jung would say that you're supposed to interact with the shadow. And it's a little bit more of the way that we see the shadow being used in Persona 4 as well, in that they are ultimately trying to help you. They are also trying to kill you, but that is, just their weird way of helping. I would argue that their ultimate goal is to try to force you to come to terms with the parts of yourself that you're uncomfortable with and try and force you to become a better person. This one's more of a clear guide as opposed to being that sort of coerced through violence into trying to become someone that you should become. We also don't actually see her shadow literally becoming a persona in this, which is something different from Persona 4 again. And this sort of, again, leads to me thinking still that these characters are not actually rejecting their shadow in the sense of eliminating it to make it part of their persona, but instead are taking it into their true selves and are becoming their shadow to a certain degree while wearing the persona on the outside. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case, but again, I think that there is a little bit more into that theory now that we've seen this particular character coming into play. The boss for this one, by the way, wasn't actually Futaba's shadow, as it was with all the other ones. Like I said, she's not actually trying to harm you, and she's not actually trying to harm Futaba. So it ends up being a cognition of her mother. And this is kind of an interesting boss battle in the Freudian sense, but it's also kind of an interesting boss battle in that because of the way that it's framed, you're basically just fighting a gigantic pair of breasts for most of it, which might also be Freudian, but I don't want to necessarily associate it that way. But yeah, very, very peculiar choice of camera angles in this particular boss battle. Very interesting fight, I guess. But in any event, it was just a really good chapter in the way that it dealt with everything. It was nice as well that it had some sort of predictable elements to it. I actually, again, was close to the mark, but not quite on the mark when I was predicting what was going to happen there. I should actually get to the point where, like, there's a sort of hidden thing so I can predict what's going to happen before I actually get to it. But I actually kind of thought that, what I had thought was that Futaba herself was the entirety of the hacker group, or that was actually going to cause a particular problem. And that she had simply fabricated the entire thing just so that she could get the Phantom Thieves to help her in that sort of coercive way. It turns out that that's not exactly what ended up happening. It turns out that she founded it, dissociated herself from it, and it was actually another member that had done it. But since she was such a large member of that sort of community and was such a skilled hacker in that sort of way, she was pretty easily able to find out who it was and shut them down, because, you know, I guess that's exactly what would happen if you founded a group. That's not really what would happen if you founded a group that could easily spiral out of your control. So, speaking of spiraling out of your control, I actually you can name your Phantom Thieves group, and they'll still call them Phantom Thieves on the news and stuff, but in the text dialogue under the screen there or whatever, it actually says the name of your group. And I actually named my group Revolution, because that's sort of the vibe that I got out of this game. It's becoming very, very appropriate as a name in terms of how this game's direction is going, because there's sort of this vaster undercurrent that's following you along, and while they aren't actually privy to the group itself, and they're not necessarily in tune with the ideals of the group, they're becoming very, very riled up and angry about the sort of injustices, and they're sort of realizing that now that there's something that can be done about it, they're getting very angry at the establishment and hoping that that establishment gets torn down. So it's kind of interesting, because that is often it's almost kind of like vanguard socialism, Marxist-Leninist kind of thing going on. But, you know, I feel like that makes the choice of the name Revolution to be quite apt in this particular case. But I don't think that the particular vanguard in this case of the Phantom Thieves themselves are going to be able to control the revolution, much like most revolutionary leaders are not necessarily capable of controlling their own revolutions. But in any event, it's going to be an interesting sort of slide as we continue along there. Have started the next chapter, and I have to say that the introduction for your new party member was extremely abrupt, but also extremely fun to watch. Your new party member essentially joins at the very start of the chapter. Like I mentioned in the previous one, they were sort of hinting towards both Futaba Sakura as well as to this other character, Haru Okumura, and both characters I thought had potential to show up in the last chapter. Instead, since they were foreshadowing her as a character prior to Futaba Sakura to a certain degree, you ended up getting both of them all at once, basically, because at the end of Futaba's chapter, you start the next one and immediately get Haru. So, kind of close on that regard, but not quite on the mark again there. She's kind of a fun character in the sense of just how bumbling she seems, especially when all it is like her and Morgana, and they're both trying to like be impressive or whatever. It's also kind of fun to see like Morgana trying to vent his frustrations through through poor Haru there and not being very good at it. But all around, I think that Persona has always been very good at creating very fun and interesting and entertaining characters. Yusuke continues to be by far my favorite character in this game. Just that scene where he just sort of walks up and he's got like lobsters and everyone's just like, what are you doing? Is just very, very entertaining to me. That's the exact sort of thing that I would do. I remember like when I was in, I think it was elementary school actually, and me and my friends were all at a theme park and I'd like wandered off, and I don't know what my friends were doing, but when I came back with to my friends, I was carrying this big jug of maple syrup, and my friends were like, "Why do you have that?" And I actually was I was just drinking it, but you know that whole sort of thing there, it just sort of reminded me of myself when I was a little bit younger, and probably actually that is actually still what I'm like now. Actually, I'll wander off and do random things and show up in places with random ass things, and people will be like, "Why the hell do you have that?" And I'm just like, I don't know. But yeah, so no, he continues to be a character that I tremendously relate to. A lot of the other characters are also relatable in their own sort of way, but not necessarily to me personally. I just think they're all very fun people. You know, some of them remind me of people I know. A lot of them remind me of people I know. It's just it's good. The characters in this so far have been very good. But anyway, let's get into psychology and stuff like that. So, psychology and psychiatry are very difficult to pin down when it comes to diagnosing people. It's hard to diagnose medical conditions in the field of like physical medicine. It is much harder, in my opinion, to diagnose mental conditions just because it's harder to get the relevant information. You can do a biopsy to determine that someone has cancer. You know, you can get your suspicion that it might be cancer through the use of like through discussion and talking to that patient and looking through the symptoms and signs and so on and so forth. But ultimately, you can just go in there, look for the physical malady itself, extract it, isolate it, and be like, yep, you've got cancer cells. You know, you can take a blood sample and say, yes, you've got this disease. Yes, you've got this bacteria in your bloodstream. You can't do that for the vast majority of mental conditions. It's a lot harder to use a physical means to directly diagnose a definitive cause-effect sort of thing in a human brain. It's possible in some conditions, especially if it's significant brain damage. Certain forms of clinical depression also cause vastly different CAT scans in people, as well as some other conditions can cause dramatically different CAT scans in people. But ultimately, it's a lot harder to diagnose certain conditions in individuals, and we're going to be talking about Futaba Sakura as a sort of case study and talk about sort of the differences and difficulties. Now, a lot of people from my description, especially people on the internet, because it's both a buzzword and people on the internet are largely ignorant about psychology, are going to diagnose her as being potentially autistic because she is extremely socially awkward, she has very poor social skills, and she doesn't really interact socially with other people. But I don't think that actually is a very accurate representation of what she probably has, and we'll be getting into that for further on. Now, she does have those symptoms, and that does mean that you could theoretically diagnose her with that. Most psychologists are savvy enough to realize that you have to ask other questions to figure out if that's what's actually going on. And it's important that you actually get this right, because if you're using therapeutic techniques or medications for the wrong disorder, even if it has the same symptoms, you're not going to be causing any effective changes in that individual there. So next we have to talk about schizophrenia. And if you are talking to somebody, you can immediately tell how much they know about psychology if you ask them what schizophrenia is. Your average person, at least 5 years ago, would say that schizophrenia is multiple personality disorder, which I think people are becoming more savvy about this nowadays than they used to be. So if they still think that schizophrenia is multiple personalities, then they are completely hopeless in the field of psychology, and you might as well be talking to a mushroom as far as that field goes. Schizophrenia, people believe that it means multiple personality disorders because of the etymology of the word. Schizo it comes from the sort of same root word as something like schism. It means split mind. So literally split brain, split friend, in other words. So it is the splitting of the mind, and a lot of people take that to mean that it's the mind breaking into different personalities. Coincidentally, we don't call it multiple personality disorder either. So if someone says that it's, multiple personality disorder or something like that, or multiple personalities or something like that, not only are they wrong, they're wrong on both parts, because not only do we not call not only does schizophrenia not refer to that, but multiple personality disorder is not what we call it. We call it dissociative identity disorder. And it's, a very, very uncommon condition. Both of them are. So it's a lot harder to analyze and study these. But they're well, I don't know if they're completely unrelated. There might be some level of relationship between them, but I don't think there is. At least not last I checked. I don't think there was a correlation between them. There are some times where you'll end up seeing someone who has a risk factor for a specific mental condition. So someone has a risk for, say, manic depression or something like that, and maybe that means that they're more likely to have another condition as well. I can't think of any off the top of my head that would be good examples for this, but in any event, so yeah, schizophrenia is not a multiple personality disorder. What schizophrenia is a major disturbance in the way that the brain physically acts, the way that your brain physically reacts to situations and perceives the world around it. Common symptoms for schizophrenia are things like hallucinations, both auditory and visual, and these can be extreme auditory and visual hallucinations. Typically speaking, if you just sort of see something out of the corner of your eye, that's not really an indicator of schizophrenia. Like, it could potentially be, but it's not likely to be. They've got extreme disordered thoughts and speech patterns. The term that gets used for the way that someone who's schizophrenic and having difficulty forming coherent sentences speaks is referred to as word salad. And that's kind of descriptive of how they speak in some instances where they're having moments. And schizophrenia, like a lot of other very intense conditions, is not necessarily a constant thing. Someone who's schizophrenic will have good moments and they'll have bad moments. So they are not going to constantly be talking in... If you know someone and they seem to sound lucid and sensible sometimes, and most of the time, in fact, that doesn't mean that they're not schizophrenic. It just means that they're not having a sort of episode. Another trademark element of schizophrenia is that they are often delusional. Typically, it can be paranoid delusions because the auditory hallucinations are often persecutory against them and can be quite damaging to them as an individual. And there's also catatonic schizophrenia, which is a technically separated type of schizophrenia. There's different categories of schizophrenia, but the catatonic schizophrenics will basically seize up and not move for potentially days at a time, just in very, very awkward, uncomfortable positions. Generally speaking, one of the things that people think might happen with schizophrenics is that their brain is incapable of not processing information extremely quickly. And this is extremely exhausting to the schizophrenic and can end up resulting in them going into a catatonic state after their brain seizes up, essentially, after they've had a certain amount of cognition in very rapid order. And it also explains things like the word salad, it explains things like the hallucinations, but it's a rare condition and it's not necessarily super well understood or studied, simply because, again, it is a rare condition. And it's also one of those ones where it's a little bit difficult to get patient cooperation to a certain extent because often they're paranoid and they're delusional. So now let's break down some of the elements that we see in Futaba Sakura here. So when we talk to her, and talk about her and talk to her with her guardian, Sojiro, we understand that she has recently started seeing hallucinations. And this is something that happened just a few years prior to the game. Not actually immediately after her mother died, but shortly after that. And this indicates that there's enough lead time for her to not have been subject to hallucinations as a direct result of that, but probably sometime after that, just from natural growth. Oops, just a second there. Wonder what the hell that was. It's probably me hallucinating, but in any event, nope, that is definitely something... Well, either way, so yeah, the general gist of it is that as a character, she starts seeing these hallucinations, she starts hearing these auditory hallucinations, and these are both of those hallucinations are very deliberate paranoid accusations against her. They're false accusations against her, and it's sort of very, very typical of intense schizophrenia. And this starts... Basically, I think she probably is about 14 or something like that at the point in time that would have started, maybe 15. Actually, it's probably even a little bit older than that. She's probably 16 when they started. But in any event, one of the hallmarks of schizophrenia is that it's a young adult's disorder. Typically speaking, you'll start seeing it emerge in people in their late teens, early 20s. It is partly genetic, but it is also created through biological triggers. So while we know that there's a genetic factor to it, usually people who have it can have it lay dormant until something causes it to really sort of take root and emerge, which is why it was so difficult for quite some time for people to figure out if it was a genetic disorder or if it was an environmental disorder, because it doesn't rely on strict hereditary factors. We can't trace direct lines easily between people with schizophrenia. And even if two schizophrenics, for example, have a child, pass along all the genes that have schizophrenia to that child. Not that maybe they have identified the gene for that, but not last time I checked. But in any event, they'll pass along all the genes that are associated with schizophrenia, and that child, but just because of the conditions that they grow up in, might not end up with schizophrenia. Okay, so that's the sort of conditions that we are seeing with people with schizophrenia. And by contrast, someone who's had a family who has no history of it could potentially have schizophrenia just because that gene has lain essentially dormant through generations. It hasn't had the same environmental factors that have triggered that sort of schizophrenic response. And we're also not necessarily, or at least last I heard, we're not entirely 100% sure what the environmental triggers are for schizophrenia to essentially activate. So it's a very peculiar disorder, and it's a very rare. And you'll notice from my description of the symptoms of it, it can be very severe. So one of the things about Sakura, though, is that she understands that she is hallucinating. And this is atypical of people who have schizophrenia. And most of them are not aware that their paranoid delusions are incorrect. To a certain degree, she does understand that. Although she believes that some of her delusions are real. She believes that she killed her mother, and she believes that she deserves a certain amount of punishment for that. But some of the other paranoid delusions regarding that she knows are false. She knows that her mother isn't actually haunting her. She doesn't believe that the hallucinations of her mother or of the people around her accusing her of having murdered her mother are real. She doesn't believe that she knows that those are hallucinations, which is very, very atypical of schizophrenics. A schizophrenic will fully believe that those accusations are coming from actual voices, whether it be supernatural or from other people or from something else, and they'll often believe that the things that they're seeing are actually literally real, even if they can't physically be real. They're not capable of perceiving reality as it actually is. This is a very, very serious condition in that case. So we actually can potentially say that she might not be fully schizophrenic. So what's that leave us with? Well, we might be able to say that she has PTSD because she did, in fact, see her mother die directly in front of her at a very young age. After that, she was accused of having killed her by various other people. Her suicide was blamed on her, and a whole bunch of other conditions that would, generally speaking, be considered to be traumatic were pushed upon her. And again, this doesn't really explain some of the elements to it. While people with PTSD might have flashbacks and many of the social disabilities and social disorders, especially if she also gained agoraphobia from the incident, you're going to see a lot of similar conditions. Agoraphobia is the fear of being out in open spaces, by the way. You're going to be seeing a lot of those similar symptoms in this case. The difference is that flashbacks from post-traumatic stress disorder aren't direct hallucinations. She's hallucinating things that did not literally happen and which she knows didn't happen. She knows that they're hallucinations and not events that she's remembering, which is atypical of post-traumatic stress disorder. And they're not nightmares, which can happen quite often in people who are suffering from PTSD, or night terrors. Night terrors could also be something that someone from PTSD is suffering from. So with all of that in case, it's probably not post-traumatic stress disorder. And it would be very easy to assign her as having post-traumatic stress disorder just based on the events that happened. And again, that's the sort of misdiagnosis that can occur if you're not careful about sort of figuring out what exactly is going on. Are those visions that she's having memories, or are they actual literal hallucinations of events that did not happen and that she doesn't remember happening, and so on and so forth. So there's another condition that is considered a personality disorder that is highly, highly related to schizophrenia. There are plenty of people who actually believe that it is simply milder schizophrenia, and that is the schizotypal personality disorder. Hold on one second here. All right, so here's the symptoms of the schizotypal personality disorder. So listing them off here, and I'm just taking this off the internet. I don't really want to dig up the DSM in particular right now, although I could. But in any event, we've got a symptom of being a loner, which she does exhibit. She has often got incorrect interpretation of events. So that's partly the sort of paranoia that she has and distrust of other people who talk to her, and this sort of manifests into a sort of social anxiety. She has peculiar or eccentric or unusual thinking, beliefs, or mannerisms. We'll see. She does have some peculiar mannerisms. The fact that she'll sort of cover up her face in awkward ways in social situations where it's not particularly appropriate to do that, or in ways which are not particularly appropriate to do that. Dressing in peculiar ways, same as above in a certain extent there. Belief in special powers, well, it's hard to say what's going on there because she does have them. Actually, she's very skeptical about this one, so this one might not apply, but she does literally gain those, so I think that she has to believe in them to a certain extent. She has unusual perceptions, such as sensing an absent person's presence or having illusions. She does display this through her hallucinations, which she's aware of as being hallucinations, persistent and excessive social anxiety. She actually has a panic attack, and this is after you resolve her sort of initial crisis in a public place when she's sort of wandering around trying to buy a game by herself. Peculiar style of speech, such as vague or unusual patterns of speaking or rambling oddly during conversations. She does display the sort of inability to answer people in a sort of meaningful way. The only person that she ends up sort of opening up to is Yusuke, and she sort of has a love-hate relationship with Yusuke in a very odd way. It makes sense that she can relate to him a little bit because neither of them seem to be operating on a functional wavelength, but that sort of ends up being the way they are. She has a very vague way of speaking because she won't actually answer questions in a sort of direct way or in any sort of way when she can avoid it. Suspicious or paranoid thoughts and constant doubts about the loyalty of others. I don't think that she necessarily exhibits this. She is willing to believe in the loyalty of others much, much more readily than I would normally associate someone with her life story as doing. She implicitly trusts both her guardian as well as the main character, so both of those characters have developed that much, much faster and much more readily than I would normally associate as being possible for somebody both with the condition of schizotypal personality disorder and of having her life story be what it is. Now, she doesn't trust necessarily the other team, and this is fine. I think that is explainable through the environment that she's been raised in rather than the condition. But there's some evidence that she might not exhibit this particular symptom. Flat emotions or limited or appropriate emotional responses. This one she doesn't particularly seem to have in huge abundance, but remember, to be actually diagnosed with the disorder, you don't necessarily need to have every single symptom ticked off. And she does have enough of the major symptoms of this disorder that I think that she either must have schizotypal personality disorder or she has full-blown schizophrenia. It's possible for someone with schizophrenia to have those sort of very intense hallucinations, auditory and visual, and still have some sense that they understand what is real and what is not. Sometimes if they've gone on longer, then sometimes they lose sight of what is real and what is not. But in her particular case, it might just be that the hallucinations have been short-term enough that she's able to logically deduce which ones are which. So yeah, there's a few different reasons why you might want to diagnose carefully to determine if someone is schizophrenic as opposed to schizotypal, although in this particular case the harm is more in associating her with having a mere anxiety disorder, or associating her with having autism, or associating her with having post-traumatic stress disorder, because in any of those cases you're going to be far enough off the mark. Despite the fact that she displays all of the symptoms of those disorders, or many of the symptoms of those disorders, or it would be very easy to conflate her account of her schizophrenia or schizotypal personality disorder as any of those disorders. And because of that, it would be very easy to give her the incorrect medication or give her the incorrect therapy for the condition. And since schizophrenia is so intense and so dangerous, well, it's not really... typically speaking, like, people think that schizophrenics are extremely dangerous. That's not true. They're usually more of a danger to themselves than they are to others, but they can be a major danger to themselves, and it does dramatically influence their quality of life as well. But if you're trying to medicate, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, and you're giving them things like anti-anxiolytics or something like that, and counseling and therapy to try and get them past that. Well, that's not going to work. That's not going to solve the problem, because schizophrenia is a much different condition than that. It's very neurological in nature there. So you're going to end up resulting in failure to actually fix the problem. By contrast, I think that schizophrenia is one of those disorders that's slightly overdiagnosed, or at least I think it used to be. It's an extremely rare condition, so I think that to a certain extent people who think that they might have someone who has that condition near them are more likely to want that to be the case, just because it would be, I guess, novel or interesting for that person to have diagnosed and to have observed firsthand. But in any event, it is definitely not really something that you're going to see often enough to make an accurate diagnosis of, in my opinion. But I mean, if you actually have this disorder, well, I should actually qualify some of this. I actually have a lot of the symptoms that I just listed there. But one of the things that you have to realize as well is that you can have some of the symptoms on paper. Like, for example, I am considered to be peculiar or eccentric by a lot of people, but I'm not that peculiar or eccentric. I can still fit into a crowd and look like a normal person. I dress in peculiar ways, such as I will almost always look a little bit unkempt, and I always wear long sleeve shirts, even when it's 40, 50 above, and I'm talking about degrees Celsius. I have persistent and excessive social anxiety, but it's manageable. Well, actually, no, I can't say that. I don't have excessive social anxiety, but I do have persistent social anxiety. I do actually have hallucinations, very, very mild auditory ones. It's usually just people I hear sort of calling my name when I'm very tired, or even when I'm not tired, I'll sometimes hear people calling my name. And it just sounds like somebody just when they need me to go do something. And then that's it. They don't tell me to do anything afterwards. So that wouldn't be considered harmful. It would still be listed under the sort of disorder there, but it wouldn't be considered sort of anything else. And there's a whole bunch of other things in there. Like I'm often suspicious or paranoid about others. I'm probably quite rambly. I think that I personally am, and you probably can tell from these podcasts that I am quite rambly. All of these elements do coincide with the disorder, but you have to have these to a fairly extreme degree. And if, in fact, schizotypal personality disorder just is a minor version of schizophrenia, that would mean that I'm somewhere on the scale. But that doesn't mean that I've got schizotypal personality disorder, and that doesn't mean that I've got schizophrenia. So for a lot of disorders in psychology as well, it's a little bit harder to diagnose people accurately because they might not display all the symptoms, they might display them to varying degrees, and you might actually diagnose somebody who's got such a low level that it's not affecting their quality of life, isn't harmful, and you might still diagnose them with the condition anyway because on paper they still fit the criteria. But it's a very difficult, thin line to sort of determine when it becomes a mental illness and when it's simply just the way the person is. So there's a lot to diagnosing people in this field, and I'm not saying that you should necessarily cut your therapists any slack if they misdiagnose you with something, but just understand that maybe this is why it's going to be so hard sometimes to get a clear diagnosis, or why maybe if you go to 3 or 4 different people, they all have different opinions on what your condition might be, or so on and so forth. And it's also dangerous for you as an individual to try and project on them what you think you have. If you think that you are, for example, schizophrenic, but you're not, and you sort of go to people until you get one that's willing to confirm that belief, that's also not good. So there's a lot to diagnosis of mental illnesses that I think is quite difficult and quite interesting, and I think that it'll be interesting as well going through this character's story arc, figuring out more about them, and seeing if my sort of initial impression is correct, because again, you have to know someone fairly well to figure out exactly what they have for sure. It's easy to jump to a conclusion, but I think that it comes up where you have to really dig deep and analyze to figure out exactly what it is they have, which you might not be able to do just on a surface level examination, looking at them from a narrow sort of view of events. But in any event, that's our talk for today. Hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.